Hi everyone, this is my response to our first prompt for Chapter 6 and for issues in diversity, and talking about sort of those three, the three issues that Woolfolk has raised, and I want to start then with this idea of tracked teaching. Woolfolk, in her book, writes that students that are tracked into low ability, general, practical, and vocational classes are typically taught to memorize and not necessarily critically think about the things that are going on, and in that way they end up learning more passively, as Wolf puts it. And so then to kind of take that a step further, oftentimes I think then that as soon as, or at least in my experience, as soon as teachers know that these kids are just sort of there to get the best grades that they can, and not necessarily the best grades that they should be getting, or that not actualizing the potential that these students have, these teachers start to teach to pass and not to learn. And I think that then it does a disservice to our students, especially if, at least in my experience, when I work with special ed kids that are oftentimes just kids that are diagnosed with high functioning autism. These kids are smart, and they definitely know the material, and they definitely can retain the material. But as soon as that happens, oftentimes these teachers they put their students into a situation where they either don't have to learn as much, or the students don't care as much, because the students understand and can totally tell when the teachers are giving them modified work, and not keeping them to or not holding them to the same expectations that they would hold normal students. So in my ways, the ways that I try to mitigate this is that if an assignment that hasn't been modified for the special ed kids that I support, and if that assignment seems that it's really tough and challenging for that kid, I definitely try to find ways to break the assignment down even further, but still expect the same work and still expect the same kind of, I guess I'm going to say rigorousness. I realize that's probably not a word, but I expect the same amount of work and the same amount of critical thinking into an assignment as these traditional students are putting into it. And so then that kind of leads me into my next point, which is lower teacher expectations. This is kind of on the last page of our book, or last page of the chapter, I should say, that Woolfolk talks about it. Let's see if I can make sure that I find this here. So teachers have a responsibility to make sure that their students know how to read, write, speak, compute, think, and create, and they do this, as Woolfolk says, through constant, rigorous, culturally connected instruction, and that there's a strong emphasis on academics. But when this happens, there's oftentimes there's bias that comes through, and again, I think this happens as soon as you know that students have been tracked in some way. And this idea of being tracked, it doesn't even have to be tracked. It really could be the fact that students are of a different race, of a different ethnicity, of a different social economical status. Any of these things that go into any sort of preconceived notion, and so that teachers need to be very cognizant of this and aware of this. One of the things that Woolfolk talks about is know yourself, know the biases that you have. If you look at me, I am a tall white male. Like I come from opportunity that is very clear in just the fact of the way that I look. Not everybody has that. Not everybody has the same opportunities. I think about the fact that, like, I've always had a car. I've always had the ability to get to where I need to go. If a situation has ever demanded it. Our students don't always have that, but it's not necessarily to say that because somebody doesn't have a way to get to school or a way to get to work, that they're going to perform lower, or that they should be expected to perform lower, and that you should make exceptions for that. And that's what's bogus, really. And I think that this happens, these biases happen all the time, especially in my field of special ed. I have some great case managers that I work with that I think do a really good job to hold their students to the same expectations. One of the things that, just a specific example again for myself, is that I work with this girl named Katie who has Down syndrome. And Katie, oftentimes, as I help her out in Phi Ed, has difficulty getting downstairs to get ready for gym, to go to the locker rooms and get changed. This has been sort of an issue that's gotten kind of worse over the last couple of weeks. The first week of school, she was able to go down the stairs just fine to get down to where the locker rooms are, but it's slowly turned into her needing to have her hand held and in order to walk down, which probably equates to like 20 stairs or so. And then that same way, as this issue has grown larger, we've talked to the adapted FIAD teacher, and she's emailed the parents, and the mom responded back saying she's totally just doing this for attention. She knows that she can manipulate you. This is something we didn't really, that myself and another pair that are in that classroom didn't really think about. It was more so we were just trying to get her down the stairs in order to get her to class so that the rest of the class could get going and they wouldn't have to make any sort of adjustments or modifications for the student who should, as it turns out, be able to get down there. So, to sort of reiterate on this one, you need to have high expectations of your students. Katie, although she has Down syndrome, is 16 and goes up and down stairs every day. We found this out through an email from her mom, and it's kind of one of those things looking back at like, oh, well, you know, I made this decision to help her out and get her down the stairs so that I could help out of that classroom, but now I'm thinking about it, what sort of disservice am I doing to Katie, and what are these things that she should actually be learning from me and from the fact that we shouldn't be holding her hand both figuratively and literally. And then this leads to my last point of sort of a student's low self-expectation. Being tracked and being biased can create two things for a student. Well, or two factors that I should say can really promote this idea of like learned helplessness. We talked about this a little bit earlier in one of our earlier chapters, I should say, and as a teacher, I feel like you don't ever want that to be the case. You want kids to be able to advocate for themselves. You want them to have their own sort of agency, and teachers really need to be cognizant of that fact. These biases that a teacher may or may not have. Let me see if I can make sure I find the page. There we go. If peers and teachers are stigmatizing these students, then these students are going to quickly learn that they don't necessarily, why should they achieve higher, or if they do achieve higher, what's the point? Because nobody's going to listen to them anyways, or their academic worth doesn't mean anything because their teachers and peers have already told them it doesn't. This can be affected by a lot of things, right? This section comes as we're talking about poverty in the book and not necessarily like gender biases, but I think that this holds true for both of those statements. If we don't actually allow the student to flourish and we don't give them the means to do it and we don't give them a safe environment to do that, then they're not going to. They're kind of like a goldfish in a sense, right? Goldfish are known to grow to the size of their tank. So the larger the tank, the larger that goldfish will become. And I think that this holds true, again, for a lot of the things that we do, and this is all part of making that goldfish a bigger goldfish, or making our goldfish bigger goldfishes.